With today being Children's Grief Awareness Day, it calls for communities and individuals to recognize the impact a loss has on kids. To help spread tips for the youth, we brought in Hope Westkids counselor, Ms. Judian Wyatt. How you doing today, young lady?
I'm doing good, thank you.
No worries. Thank you for coming on. So, Ms. Judian, could you give me some examples of what grief may be like for a child?
Yeah, it varies. Every child their grief experience is as individual as they are. So personality, a lot of factors play into it. But how it presents out into the world is any kind of changed behavior. So if all of a sudden they're eating different or sleeping different or acting up in school or being more withdrawn or being more agitated and irritable. So it just depends on the personality and what's going on.
So with all that being said right there, with the different mood swings and loss of appetite, how does a parent allow the kid to cope with grief?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because chances are they're probably coping with grief themselves too. And so that's a fine balance. So the most important thing is just to validate the children's experience. So when I say validate, I mean like just listen to what's going on and try and get to the deeper part. I know you're angry, but let's talk about where the anger might be coming from. What are you angry about? And just giving them the opportunity to realize that it could be because they're angry because grandpa died, or mom is gone now, or whatever.
Speaking from a counselor standpoint, what would you say is the scariest part about grief, seeing that in a young child?
Scariest for the child?
Yes.
Yeah, the scariest thing is we have no control over it. It kind of takes over. And so they don't know what's happening to them, and that's why it's so important for us to validate and normalize it for them. So just telling them, it's normal, it's natural for you to be angry, it's natural for you to be irritated at school and have new fears and be more anxious. That's natural for you. You've lost somebody very important to you, Yes, and so the scariest part is that they don't know what's going on. And it's normal emotions, they're just exaggerated with
Yes,
grief.
ma'am. Now, earlier you said that parents or adult or whoever the case may be should just listen. But how do you get a kid to open up to get to that listening part?
Yeah, that's another really good point, because that can be a challenge, especially nowadays with all of our devices that are dividing us. And so that's probably one of the worst things they can do, is just allow the kids to escape into their devices. The best part is, for one thing, don't make it face to face. Play a game. Get them in the car. And when you're driving in the car and they don't have to look at you, they're more apt to talk. Playing a game or doing an event together. So get involved with them, or share your own experience. I'm really sad that Dad is gone. I bet you're really sad. I bet you're, and just really share that experience with your kiddo.
Now, I want to hint about that, because how do you, as a trusted person or a person that's listening to that kid, break that news to begin with?
Especially when it's a traumatic death. Suicide is the hardest. Homicide, drug overdose. It's very difficult for parents to be honest with their children. But honesty is always the best, because what happens, Dimitri, is that kids make up their own stories. If they don't know the truth, they know something's wrong, they know it's really bad, they can tell by what's going on with their parents, and so they make stuff up, and it's always worse than the actual truth. So the most important thing is to be truthful. And we assist with that at Hope Westkids. We can assist with the parent sitting down with us and with the child. If the parent asks us not to share, we do not. We allow that. We let the family do that. But we really stress that it's so important to tell them the truth. Because the grief, the healing comes from knowing the truth.
Yes, ma'am. That's powerful. 2 more questions before I get out of your hair. Now, earlier you said that parents may be dealing with that own trauma of their self, but how do you deal with your own grief while trying to make sure you're doing all of that you mentioned for your child?
Right. And what happens when there's grief in families is that the parents tend to disappear in their grief, and so the kids are left very isolated and feeling very alone. So it's really important for parents to get their own grief support so they can be present for their kids. Because if you're not addressing and getting support for your own grief, you're not going to be able to be available for the child. And the child is just, so if they lost dad, they've lost mom too, because mom is wallowing in her grief and cannot be with the child because her grief is not being supported. So the most important thing is to get your own grief addressed, and grief is a natural process. It's gonna happen. It's like sneezing. Your body has to sneeze. It's gonna do it. But what's important is that they get grief. They get their own validation. They get to express their own emotions away from the family, away from the home, in a trusted adult. We have an adult program as well. We have a family grief group, which is wonderful. The kids get to meet, the parents get to meet, and then we meet together. And so there's a lot of support.
Really quick, one last question before we head out. You mentioned the different groups. Can you tell the Western Slope how they can get in touch with these groups if they want to?
Absolutely. HopeWestCO.org is our website, and we have all of our services on the website. So we have adult groups, all kinds of it, different days and times, different losses, different activities. And also with the children, we have different kinds of groups. We have camps, we have groups in schools, we have individual counseling for both adults and children. So HopeWestCO.org would be your best bet.